I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. Rob, this is part 5.
Part 5.
Of our several-part series. Do we even know how long it's going to be?
We never do, because we never know where our genius is going to take us
We
next.
never plan.
We never plan. Yes, it's not genius. It's carelessness, ignorance.
Laziness.
No, not laziness. No one would wade through Journey to the West if they were lazy. That's just not a thing that we would do.
No one would do it twice.
Seriously. Lee refers to the fact that we actually recorded, this is true, this entire series once already. And due to the fact that I did not really understand how some of these files were stored, I deleted the whole thing.
Wah, wah.
But this one's so much better, right? The second time around?
Yeah.
I mean, just orders of magnitude better. So it's really good that I forgot.
I think we've already mentioned this like 3 or 4 times to the listeners so far. Yeah, it's okay.
Wait, dear listener, we don't go back and listen to the podcasts again. No. We're not quite that high
Dedicated.
caliber. Yeah, no. Dedicated. We just don't care.
When we have that podcast staff.
Wouldn't that be incredible? If we could be a big enough deal that we had people,
I wouldn't put someone through that.
No, that'd be a tough job, man.
Yeah.
One of these days, maybe we'll even have like a videographer to sit in and like film us. Although no one deserves that, really. Episode 5, we are talking about one of the other episodes. We've talked about chapters 1 to 7, which I would argue are still the highlight of the novel. Mm-hmm. But what we're talking about today is possibly a close second, and that's the chapters dealing with the Fire Mountain and Princess Ironfan.
I think it's certainly the second most famous part behind those chapters 1 through 7. In chapters 1 through 7, Monkey tries to overthrow heaven. It's kind of his origin story and how he gets into the pickle that he's in. This is the most famous series of events from the kind of core of the novel. Essentially, as Tongue Monk, Monkey, Pigsy, Sandy, and the White Horse are traveling farther and farther west, they get to the region that today is known as Xinjiang, which is a place that, if we had done this podcast 2 or 3 years ago, we might have had listeners who would not have heard of it.
Yeah.
But I think you've all heard of it now. You know the kind of politics that's involved in that. This is kind of before some of those politics happen, but still kind of it has echoes of those politics. The region is a very hot desert region. It's one of the lowest points on Earth in the Taklamakan Desert. You have these mountains that are red mountains. They almost look like they're on fire. This is a kind of mythological version of having to get past those mountains,
which in this story really are on fire.
That's right. You can't approach them. The people around them have trouble growing crops. They have to get a special dispensation essentially from the gods to be able to survive in that region. It's pretty rough for them. So it's getting to be late autumn.
Oh, man. So we've got 2 for monkeys in a fire mountain in the middle of autumn. This should be like domination, right?
I mean, it's also a red mountain, so
yes.
Red is his color.
He's all over this.
Exactly. So the way this chapter plays out is essentially this. They come across the flaming mountains, and it's so hot that there's no way around them. They have to put out the fire. Monkey has to face off against Princess Ironfan. He wants to get this fan that she has that can put out the fire of the mountains. It's the only way to do it. Because Monkey has hurt her son, she does not want to give it to him. They fight, they go back and forth, a bunch of different stuff happens. We're not going to get into kind of the rough and tumble of it, but he's blown away by Princess Ironfan because she uses her fan. He gets an elixir that will allow him to remain heavy, and then he goes back, he jumps inside of her tea bubble. And
as a cricket, he transforms himself into a cricket.
Was it a cricket or a
mole
fly?
Cricket, it says. A mole cricket.
Anyways,
she's thirsty. He jumps inside her tea.
She drinks him, and he starts beating her insides. She eventually gives it to him, but she gives him a fake one, and this whole thing continues. Chapter 60, he goes to try and get the real fan from Princess Ironfan's husband, who is out hanging out with his concubine in another faraway land. They fight for a while. the Bull King, a sort of Taurus-like creature.
Yes.
After fighting for a while, he goes, "Hang on, I've got a drinking party. Can we come back to it?" It's the weirdest
thing. The Bull
thing.
King goes, hang on. They're about to start drinking. Do you mind if we just continue this later?
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing. Anyways, Monkey surreptitiously chases after the Bull King, he follows him, he learns his secret, then he goes back to Princess Ironfan.
Disguised as the Bull King.
Exactly. And he doesn't sleep with Princess Ironfan, despite the fact that he gets her drunk and she really wants it.
Yeah.
Which, remember, Monkey's thing is that he's never horny. He's a lot of things, but he's never horny.
Right.
He gets the fan. He discovers the secret. There's more back and forth. There's a fight. The world's most amazing fight ever.
It goes on for so long.
It's tedious to the point that it makes superhero cartoons look
downright subtle.
Yeah.
And
there's at a certain point you just kind of like, what's going on? So part of this is that Bull King is the doppelganger of Monkey.
Yes.
And they eventually, Monkey and Bull King are so evenly matched that the only thing that saves Monkey from having to fight with this guy who is his equal is that all of these other Buddhist deities come in and essentially beat up
the Bull King.
King. Yeah.
So he gets the real fan. Princess Ironfan changes her ways, becomes a chaste Buddhist follower. All is well. Monkey returns her fan after using it 49 times to completely get rid of the flames on the mountain and
one time
bathe
was
the
not
region
enough.
in rain and good things. And that's the end of this.
What's interesting, so there's a kind of colonial aspect to this. So we talked about how this is in Xinjiang, right?
Yes.
This is written during the Ming Dynasty. Previously, Chinese empires had extended into the region of Xinjiang. At this point, when this story is being written, no Chinese dynasty has set foot in Xinjiang for 700 or 800 years. But what Monkey says is he's going to bring the 5 grains to these people who are so benighted that they can't even eat the 5 grains. And he's going to bring them essentially Chinese weather and all of this kind of lifestyle like a proper Chinese group.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, kind of looking back on that at this point, after we've seen what's happened in Xinjiang.
Kind of tricky. Of course, what's tricky about that is, as we've talked about in, I believe, the first podcast we did on this, Monkey draws from, arguably, some older Indian stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if he is that, then it's a colonialism from India.
Well, I mean, it's a kind of like revamped colonialist thing.
And certainly by now, I think you would be hard-pressed to find a Chinese reader who sees Sun Wukong as an Indian figure. That's, yeah. So in the modern-day version, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in an earlier podcast, I think I argued that some of his Monkey's origins were from Hanuman, the Indian god.
No, but it's a good point. And I think one of the abiding sources of popularity of this chapter is not just the intensity of the battles and the drama, but also that it ends happily. It ends happier than most of the adventures in this novel do, with Sun Wukong not only getting the means to help his master achieve his goals, but also make everyone else's lives in the region better, much better. And not only that, but make the life of his antagonist, the Princess Ironfan, much better, at least in the context of the novel as well. She becomes a Buddhist
in terms
nun.
of Buddhist.
I don't know if a nun, but she becomes a Buddhist.
She starts following the way.
Yes.
Which
Now,
this is kind of the arc that Monkey goes along,
Yes.
right? Like he is resistant, he hates dealing with authority, and then he eventually submits to the Bodhisattva, and things are eventually all hunky-dory for him.
Now, we have to get into, we mentioned in the last podcast, how to read this novel according to a certain pattern so that some more drama emerges. Now, we talked about already the fact that when this chapter starts, we go, wow, everything is lining up for Monkey. So the first question I have for you, and see what you do with this, why can't Monkey just take them all through the fire? He's a fiery character. Everything's already in place. Why does he have to get rid of the fire, do you think?
He can deal with the fire, but other characters cannot. And it's such a powerful fire that I think you just can't overcome it.
There's a neat passage I wanted to toss out and see what you make of this too, because I thought it was an interesting little tidbit. So right at the beginning of this chapter, when they find a local who can tell them about why the mountain is on fire, somebody's walking by the door selling buns and dumplings and things. And so Monkey goes, "Sweet, rice puddings, I'm going to go get some." Here's what it says. After taking the money and without dickering over the price, the man at once untied the wrap on his cart and took out a piece of steaming hot rice pudding to hand over to Pilgrim, meaning Monkey. When it touched the palm of his hands, Pilgrim felt as if he had received a piece of lit charcoal or glowing nail taken from the blacksmith's stove. Look at him. He switched the pudding from the left hand to the right hand and back again to the left, and all he could say was, "Hot, hot, hot, I can't eat this." I thought he was a fiery character, Lee. What's with this? It's a rice pudding. How come he can't eat a rice pudding?
So we're at chapter 59 here. So his superpower is that he deals with flame, but that's also his super weakness.
In the Buddhist sense,
In the Buddhist sense, yeah, because flame equals anger. And I kind of wonder, we're at chapter 59, Monkey is over the hump of chapter 50. Maybe he's changed enough as a character. Not that he's beginning to wane, but he's actually growing more circumspect. He's not himself so fiery. He's controlling his anger, and maybe by coming to this place of extreme fire, he is facing the limits of his superpower and his super weakness.
Could be. I think if I remember correctly, in a different incarnation of this podcast, you and I talked about the fact that in addition to that, this is not your ordinary fire. Where does this fire come from?
We talked about in chapters 1 through 7 how Monkey kind of gets caged after almost overthrowing heaven. He gets caged in this giant brick kiln. As he's coming out, if I remember correctly, he accidentally kicks one of those bricks over. The origin of this fire is that brick in the kiln starts this fire.
And we need to point out, it's a brick in a kiln, but it's specifically the brazier of 8 trigrams, tended by Lao Tzu.
So this ain't your mama's kiln.
This is not your mama's kiln. It's related to the way, so it's not just a fire someone set. This is something burning with the heat of something that Monkey himself is supposed to want to practice.
And to a certain degree, he cannot overcome this fire, partially because it's his own fault.
Right.
And this is something that captured him and held him back in the beginning. Now he's having to face it again.
So you see what we mean about the, I say you to the listener, not you. I'm looking at you across the table. You certainly know because we've already talked about it. But you kind of see the what we're talking about with the variations on this pattern, right? So you see, hey, there's fire. Monkey should be able to take care of it easily. Well, Monkey can't. He gets burned by a rice dumpling. Now, at that point in the chapter, you should be going, what? Why is Monkey unable to eat a rice pudding? And you should also then realize, oh, wow, this is not your ordinary fire. This is really interesting and weird. And it is.
But it's also interesting to point out that Princess Ironfan is a very cold person. And we haven't talked too much about the gender dynamics.
Which are important.
Yeah, so Monkey represents the sort of, he's a man's man in a Chinese world, right? Like he's the ultimate yang figure, yang being this masculine force that divides the Chinese cosmology, yin and yang. You oftentimes hear this referred to in American culture, oh, yin and yang. But this is actually like a real thing that Ming Dynasty novels deal with. In his anger, Monkey is the ultimate yang figure. And what's interesting is that fan that blows him away and the princess behind it, Princess Ironfan, is noted to be very wintry, very cold.
And in fact, this is what it says about the Iron Fan, the actual leaf. It says, it is a finest leaf of the supreme yin, and that is why it can extinguish all fires. If a man is fanned by it, he will drift for 84,000 miles before the cold wind subsides.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was almost gonna
I found it before you
Thank
did.
you.
Yeah, no problem. And it's interesting, again, because the chapter has already set us up to think that this should be Monkey's victory. Now we're curious about why he can't handle a hot rice pudding. Then he comes across this figure, his ultimate yin, and you go, uh-oh.
It's the ultimate yang that is the ultimate fieriness and the ultimate yin, the ultimate coldness.
Right. First of all, she wins. But then when he comes back, this is one of the weirdest parts, I swear, in the entire book. When he changes himself into a cricket and goes inside of her. This is a not very subtle reference to childbirth.
No, it's actually, I think, a reference to sex.
Yeah, I mean, that's how he gets in. But once he's in there, the pains he's causing her, jumping around in her belly, growing larger, growing smaller. He even says at one point, I'm just having a little fun in here. To me, sound like absolute references to a baby inside a woman's body.
I mean, I think it sounds more like, to be honest, a man having fun inside a woman's body. I think that's what this is referencing here.
But he's all the way in her belly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
not saying that. But the reason this is interesting, well, I mean, I can see your point, but what's interesting to me about that, though, is that is what it does with the yin-yang relationship. Because if it is a kind of a nudge about childbirth, it's almost like the yang character taking over.
He's taking over the ultimate yin space, right?
Yeah.
The word for vagina in Chinese is literally yin dao, the way,
of yin.
The pathway of yin. I just want to note before we jump off this discussion of gender, Rob, do you remember that podcast we did on the Shio Bu?
Yes, a long time ago. Man, it was a long time ago.
3 or 4 years ago,
Yeah.
I think. So the Shio Bu is called the addendum to the Journey of the West.
To the West.
Journey to the West, thank you. It actually is kind of like a whole novel inside of this story. And it happens that the addendum to the Journey to the West is kind of shoved in between chapters 59 and 60 right here in the Journey to the West.
Right.
There's this interesting thing where the addendum of the Journey to the West, Monkey becomes this yin character. And the question is always, why does, in this book, he changes into a completely different character from the one he was in the Journey to the West? And the reason he becomes such a yin character in the addendum to the Journey to the West is because he's kind of been infected by yinness, by femininity, by jumping around inside this ultimate female character. Right. I just wanted to point that out. And if you want to go back and listen to one of our old crappy episodes.
Ooh, that was one of the bad audio editions.
Anyway, but it was actually a pretty good episode.
It wasn't a bad episode, but the sound quality is pretty rough. Okay, he does bounce around inside this ultimate yin space. The last about third or so of this little adventure is
just fighting.
It's just fighting to a stalemate with a character who also is ultimate yang. Bull King is as arrogant, impetuous, angry, powerful, all of those things as Monkey is, and
he has 72 transformations that he can do just like
Monkey. He plays a trick on Monkey just like Monkey plays a trick. It's almost like somebody fighting their mirror image.
Yeah.
Also, in a season of fire, in autumn, etc., etc. So when you come across the Bull character and find his personality, you should also be thinking, uh-oh, Monkey is fighting essentially another version of him. And he has been inside this ultimate yin space, so there's a good chance he's going to be weaker than normal.
He's been infected by the yinness, and so he's not.
He's colder,
yeah.
And so there's no way he's going to be able on his own to beat the Bull King, which is true. And eventually, of course, the Bodhisattva, or not the Bodhisattva, but some of the deities, there's many of them, have to come and save him. Now, that's a lot of stuff, and this is a fairly lengthy and kind of complicated adventure, but as a reminder of how to approach this novel, bear in mind how the drama works out. So start in a hot, fiery mountain, autumn, where all the colors are Monkey's color. Monkey can't handle all of the hotness, the heat, hotness.
He gets blown away by this ultimate supreme yin.
Yep. He comes back, is further infected by yin, has to fight a character who's ultimate yang. So in any good superhero story, facing just so much drama is drawn out of a superhero being weakened somehow and then having to fight effectively someone who's much better at what that superhero does than even that superhero themselves, right? Which is what we've got here, right? And even with 8 rules or Pigsy's help, still can't win, right? There's a stalemate. So there's a lot of drama and excitement because This fight is not obviously determined. In so many other fights in this novel, it's clear that Monkey's eventually going to win. This one, no.
And I think that's one of the interesting things about these 3 chapters is that this is where it is Journey to the West at its best.
Yes.
Because you almost feel like he might not win.
Yes, exactly.
It also feels very much like a midpoint of the novel, even though technically the midpoint is chapter 49 through 50 when they pass over the giant river. This feels more like a midpoint, even if it's not technically the midpoint of the novel when they transition. I think that's a great place to end it, Rob.
Go for it.
All right, I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.